The old pickup truck, packed to the brim, rattled cheerfully down the winding country road, leaving a plume of golden dust in its wake. Liam, at the wheel, expertly navigated the turns, his brow furrowed in concentration, but a wide grin kept breaking through. The GPS, long since out of service, lay neglected beside a crumpled paper map on the dashboard, a testament to their planned isolation. "Almost there, folks," he announced, his voice imbued with the satisfaction of a mission leader. "Last stretch of paved road, then it's just the logging trail." Beside him, Maya peered over the top of a well-worn copy of Cosmos, her sharp eyes taking in the increasingly dense tree line. "As long as almost there doesn't mean another 3 hours of this, Carter," she quipped, though a flicker of genuine anticipation danced in her gaze. She tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, the scientific curiosity that usually held her captive, momentarily yielding to the allure of the wild. In the back, Chloe bounced with every bump, her infectious laughter echoing off the truck's metal frame. A bright bandana held her auburn hair back and her eyes, bright as emeralds, sparkled with an irrepressible zest for adventure. "Can you believe it? No signal, no emails, just us and 1,000 acres of ancient forest. This is going to be epic." She clapped her hands together, practically vibrating with energy. Noah, quiet in the corner, watched the passing fields transform into an impenetrable wall of green. He didn't speak much, but his gaze was unusually intense, absorbing every detail, the way the light dappled through the canopy, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the sheer immense scale of the wilderness closing in around them. A shiver, not entirely from the crisp air, traced its way down his spine. He had a feeling about this place, a deep, unsettling intuition that had been brewing since the moment they'd planned the trip. The paved road abruptly gave way to a deeply rutted dirt track. The truck's suspension groaned in protest, but Liam handled it with an almost stubborn ease, his grip firm on the wheel. They descended deeper into the woods, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick, overlapping branches above. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. Here, the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional distant call of an unknown bird. Cell service had vanished miles ago, leaving them truly cut off. "This is it," Liam declared, his voice a little softer now, as if acknowledging the solemnity of the forest. He pulled the truck into a small, barely discernible clearing, nestled beside a trickling stream. Towering pines, their needles a deep, almost black-green, stood sentinel around them, their upper branches sighing softly in a breeze that didn't quite reach the forest floor. It was a secluded haven, exactly as advertised. They spilled out of the truck, stretching cramped limbs and breathing in the crisp, clean air. The initial high spirits surged back. Chloe immediately began pulling out gear, humming a cheerful tune. "Right, who's on tent duty? I call dibs on the fire pit." "I've got the primary tent," Liam announced, already wrestling the large canvas bundle from the truck bed. "Maya, you're with me. Noah, you and Chloe can set up the smaller one." He moved with practiced efficiency, his organizational skills kicking in. Maya, after a moment of stretching, began meticulously unloading her backpack, checking the contents with a methodical precision. "Just try not to stab anyone with a tent pole, Chloe," she dryly remarked, earning a playful glare. Noah, meanwhile, had already wandered to the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the dense woods. He ran a hand over the rough bark of an ancient pine, its surface textured like an old man's skin. The whispering sound of the wind through the needles overhead seemed to carry more than just air. It felt like a hushed conversation, an ancient secret being passed. "You know," Chloe piped up as she unfurled the smaller tent, her voice a little lower now. "The old guy at the gas station back in Blackwood Ridge, he gave me this weird look when I told him where we were going," said Whispering Pines had old spirits that didn't like visitors. She shivered dramatically, then laughed. "Can you imagine? Like something out of a horror movie." Liam scoffed, pushing a tent stake into the soft earth with a decisive thud. "Just local superstition, Chloe. Every remote patch of woods has its ghost stories. Keeps the tourists away, I suppose." "Precisely," Maya added, adjusting her glasses. "Humans project their fears onto the unknown. There's no empirical evidence of forest spirits, just the wind through the trees and the rustling of wildlife." Noah turned from the tree line, his expression unreadable. He looked at Chloe, then at Maya, then finally at Liam. He didn't say anything, but a subtle shift in his eyes, a deepening of their usual quiet intensity, spoke volumes to those who knew him best. It wasn't a challenge, but a silent acknowledgement that some things perhaps couldn't be explained away by logic or dismissed as mere folklore. For now, though, the thrill of the adventure eclipsed any lingering unease. They worked together, their movements synchronized by years of friendship, transforming the wild clearing into a comfortable camp. Tents rose, sleeping bags were unrolled, and the promise of a crackling fire and warm food hung in the increasingly chill evening air. The lure of whispering pines had drawn them in, and they were ready for whatever wilderness might offer. First whispers. The last embers of the campfire pulsed, a warm orange heart against the encroaching indigo. Liam, satisfied with the tight perimeter of their tents and the neatly stacked firewood, leaned back, a steaming mug cradled in his hands. "Couldn't ask for a better spot, could you?" he mused, a hint of pride in his voice. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the clean scent of pine and damp earth. Overhead, the stars began to pinprick the velvety canvas of the sky, more numerous and brilliant than any city dweller could imagine. Chloe, ever the optimist, hummed a tuneless melody, poking a half-burnt log with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the dark. "It's perfect. Feels like we're the only people for 100 miles. Maya, perched on a fallen log, pulled her jacket tighter, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Mathematically, that's highly improbable, but I appreciate the sentiment, Chloe." Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the tree line, not for danger, but for the sheer expanse of the wilderness. Noah, quiet as always, simply stared into the deepening shadows beyond the fire's glow. He hadn't contributed much to the conversation since they'd set up camp, his gaze often drifting to the towering ancient pines that loomed just beyond their campsite. There was a solemnity in his expression that hinted at something deeper than mere contemplation. As the fire dwindled to a softer glow, the surrounding forest, once a comforting curtain, began to feel like an enormous, silent presence. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. These familiar sounds seemed to hush, replaced by an expansive quiet that pressed in from all sides. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a quality of silence, heavy and expectant. Then, it began. A faint, dragging rustle, distinct from the wind, originating from the dense undergrowth to their left. It wasn't the light scurry of a rabbit or the graceful tread of a deer. This sound was heavier, more deliberate, as if something large was moving with an awkward, disjointed gait. Liam straightened, his easygoing posture stiffening. "What was that?" "Probably just a bear," Maya stated, her voice firm, attempting to inject logic into the sudden tension. "Or a very large raccoon. They're common in these parts." The rustling stopped, only to resume moments later, closer this time, and then moved further away, circling their camp. It was too erratic, too purposeful for a simple animal foraging. Chloe clutched her knees, her earlier cheer evaporating. Her eyes darted into the darkness, searching for what her mind refused to acknowledge. A low, guttural growl broke the silence, deep and primal, yet strangely not quite animalistic. It was distant, but carried a chilling resonance through the still night air, seeming to vibrate in their very bones. It wasn't the roar of a bear or the snarl of a wolf. It had an unnatural rasp to it, a quality of ancient hunger. Liam grabbed the flashlight, sweeping its beam across the trees, but the light only seemed to deepen the shadows, creating fleeting monstrous shapes from the branches. "Okay, that wasn't a raccoon," he admitted, his voice tight. He forced a reassuring tone he didn't feel. "Definitely a bear, a big one. Let's just make some noise." He grabbed a pot and spoon, clanging them together. The growl faded, swallowed by the forest. The rustling, however, continued its slow, deliberate circuit. Maya, though visibly unsettled, maintained her rational front. "It's responding to the sound, trying to assert dominance or scare us off. That's typical large predator behavior. We're in their territory." She tried to sound convincing, but her gaze kept returning to the impenetrable wall of trees. Noah, who had not spoken a word, finally stirred. He sat perfectly still, his eyes wide and fixed on the darkness, not following Liam's flashlight beam, but staring through it, as if seeing something others couldn't. A shiver, not from the cold, ran through him. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that this was not a bear. The sound felt ancient, burdened with a malevolence that seeped into the very air. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a sense of profound wrongness that went beyond simple fear. He couldn't articulate it, but a deep, inchoate dread settled over him, subtly shifting the mood of their small group from simple apprehension to a chilling, shared unease. The rustling continued, a relentless whisper of unseen movement, an unwelcome, haunting lullaby. The trapper's mark, the oppressive stillness of the deeper woods settled on them like a shroud. Sunlight, once dappled and playful, struggled to pierce the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in shifting shades of emerald and umber. Liam, compass in hand, navigated with a focused intensity that bordered on grim. All right, according to the topo map there should be a small stream just beyond this rise. Good place to filter water. Chloe, ever restless, kicked at a clump of moss. Are we sure we're not just walking in circles? Everything looks the same back here. That's the beauty of it, Chloe, Maya chimed in, adjusting her glasses. Nature's camouflage. Though I confess, I'm surprised how untouched this area feels. No signs of other hikers. Noah, who had been lagging slightly behind, his gaze fixed on the gnarled roots that snaked across the forest floor, suddenly stopped. Wait! His voice, usually soft, held an unusual edge. They all paused, turning to him. Noah wasn't one for dramatics. He pointed a trembling finger deeper into the gloom. Look. Through the thick tangle of ancient pines and skeletal birches, a shape emerged. Not a natural one. It was low and squat, covered in a thick layer of moss and creepers, but its geometric lines were undeniable. A structure. Liam pushed through a curtain of hanging vines, his eyes widening. A cabin. It was more than just a cabin. It was ancient, its timbers warped and blackened with age. The roof collapsed in places, creating jagged teeth against the dim sky. But what truly held their gaze were the carvings. Every visible surface, the doorframe, the remaining wall planks, even the lintel above the missing window, was etched with a dizzying array of symbols. Spirals, interlocking lines, crude representations of antlers and eyes, all deeply incised into the decaying wood. They looked less like decoration, and more like a feverish, desperate prayer. What in the world? Chloe breathed, her usual boisterous energy replaced by a hushed awe. It's like something out of a fairy tale, but a really creepy one. Maya, ever the scientist, approached cautiously, running a finger over a particularly intricate carving of a stag's head with impossible antlers. These aren't typical logging marks, they feel protective. Like wards. Her voice was low, laced with a tremor of scientific curiosity, battling an unacknowledged prickle of unease. Liam, ever pragmatic, pulled out his multi-tool. Let's not touch anything. Could be unstable. Who would build something so far out here, and why the art? As they circled the dilapidated structure, Noah let out a sharp gasp. He was staring at a massive pine tree, just beyond the cabin's crumbling foundation. The bark, rough and thick, was scored with 3 parallel gashes. Not shallow scrapes from a deer or a bear, but deep, gouging wounds that had torn through layers of wood, exposing the pale heartwood beneath. They were impossibly wide, easily the length of Liam's forearm, and ended in blunt, brutal tips. The lowest mark was nearly 8 feet off the ground. No way, Chloe whispered, her face paling. What could do that? Liam knelt, his usually steady hands hovering inches from the lowest gouge. This isn't a bear. Not even a grizzly could make marks this deep, and certainly not this high. And look at the spacing. It's unnatural. His voice, usually so confident, wavered. The meticulous plans he'd made for this trip felt flimsy in the face of this raw, inexplicable violence etched into the ancient tree. Maya, abandoning her scientific detachment, stared, her jaw slack. It's monstrous. And there are more. She pointed to another pine, then another, each bearing the same horrifying scars. The marks radiated out from the cabin like a silent, terrifying declaration. A chilling wind, absent moments before, rustled through the tops of the pines, carrying with it the faint, cloying scent of damp earth, and something else, something primal and cold. Noah instinctively reached for Chloe's hand, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if seeing beyond the visible. We shouldn't be here, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. yet it cut through the sudden, suffocating silence of the ancient woods. "We've disturbed something." Under watch, the oppressive quiet of the forest floor felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Liam, meticulously organizing their dwindling supplies, frowned. His compass, usually clipped to his belt loop, was gone. He'd used it just this morning, verifying their position against the crude map he'd sketched. He patted his pockets, then checked the ground around his sleeping bag. Nothing. He bit back a sigh, attributing it to his own oversight. Probably dropped it somewhere. Later, Maya's normally precise voice held a tremor. "My multi-tool. It was right here, next to my water bottle." She gestured to the small rock she used as a nightstand. "I even cleaned the blade last night." Chloe, rummaging through her backpack, suddenly gasped. "My lucky charm, the little carved owl I've had since I was a kid. It's not here." Her eyes, usually bright with mischief, were wide and moist. Noah, who had been sitting by the dying embers of the fire, didn't look up. His gaze was fixed on the tree line, a distant, unsettling calm on his face. "It's not just us," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "The squirrels, they're gone. And the birds stopped singing hours ago." A sudden, aggressive cold swept through the clearing, far more intense than any autumn chill. It didn't just bite, it seeped into their bones, a frigid breath that seemed to steal the warmth from their very thoughts. The air, already still, grew heavy, almost viscous. The leaves on the trees, which had been a vibrant tapestry of reds and golds, seemed to mute, their colors draining under the oppressive pall. Even in the broad daylight the shadows deepened, stretching long and distorted, clinging to the trunks of ancient pines like grasping fingers. Liam shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. "This isn't normal. It's like the temperature just dropped 30 degrees in a second." He looked at Noah, whose quiet observation always unnerved him. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Noah finally turned, his eyes holding an ancient weariness. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he began, his voice low, almost reverent. "About the woods when they get hungry. When something wakes up that's not meant to be awake." Maya scoffed, her logical mind struggling against the unsettling atmosphere. "Hungry woods, Noah, seriously. It's probably a cold front, or maybe we're just getting sick." She rubbed her arms, though her bravado was clearly a facade. Her lips were tinged blue. "No," Liam interjected, remembering hushed tales from the few locals he'd spoken to before their trip. "He's right. There are legends around here. Old ones. They talk about a Alkori, whispering shadow. Or the forest hunger." He swallowed, the words tasting like ash. "Things that take. Not just objects, but warmth, hope." Chloe huddled closer to Liam, her usual effervescent spirit dimmed. "Things that take," she repeated, her voice small. "Like what?" Noah finally articulated his deep unease. "My grandmother said it was a spirit, a hungry one. It comes when the balance is off, when people intrude where they don't belong. It starts small, little things vanish. Then the cold sets in. And then, it gets closer." His gaze drifted back to the tree line, now almost obscured by the deepening unnatural gloom. The air thrummed with an unheard vibration, a low, guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was a hungry, watchful silence pressing in from all sides. Each rustle of leaves, each creak of a branch, sounded less like nature, and more like a deliberate, unseen movement. Liam felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far worse than the biting air. He prided himself on preparation, on logic, on handling any situation. But this was something his maps and compasses couldn't account for. This was something ancient and malevolent, and it felt like it was watching them, from just beyond the reach of their sight. The missing items, the sudden, impossible cold, Noah's quiet warnings. They painted a picture of a presence, unseen but undeniably felt, tightening its grip around their small camp. They were no longer just camping, they were being observed. And the observer was getting impatient. Retreat. The oppressive silence of the forest had become a physical weight, pressing in on them. No crickets chirped, no distant owl hooted. Even the usual rustle of leaves seemed to hold its breath. They sat around the dying embers of their fire, the flickering light doing little to dispel the shadows that danced menacingly at the perimeter of their small camp. "We can't stay here." Noah finally broke the quiet, his voice a strained whisper. His eyes, usually so calm, were wide and darted nervously towards the dense tree line. He'd barely spoken since the chill had set in, but his unease was palpable, a cold tendril that had snaked around their collective hearts. Liam, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Noah's right. This isn't right. My gut's screaming at me." He gestured vaguely at the encompassing darkness. "I've camped in the backcountry for years, but I've never felt anything like this. It's like the forest itself is watching us, waiting." He ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure visibly frayed. The map, which had once been his comfort, now felt like a taunt. Maya, who had spent the last hour meticulously cleaning her multi-tool, snapped it shut with a definitive click. "I've been trying to rationalize it, to find a scientific explanation for the temperature drops, the sounds, but I can't. There's something, an intelligence to it. It's too deliberate." Her voice, usually so steady and analytical, held a tremor of genuine fear. Her scientific mind, her fortress, was crumbling. Chloe, who had been huddled in her sleeping bag, her face pale in the firelight, pulled her knees closer to her chest. "I just want to go home. My skin is crawling. Every shadow looks like something is hiding in it." Her voice was small, stripped of its usual effervescence. She hugged herself, as if trying to shrink away from the encroaching dread. The unspoken conclusion hung heavy in the air, a shared understanding that solidified their individual fears into a collective decision. "So, we pack up tomorrow morning?" Liam asked, though it was more of a confirmation than a question. A chorus of nods, some hesitant, some immediate. The relief that should have accompanied the decision was strangely absent, replaced by a fresh wave of dread. They had chosen to leave, but they still had to survive one more night. "First light," Maya stated, her jaw tight. "We pack everything, leave nothing behind." "No trace." Noah shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. "It won't matter, it knows we're leaving." His words, quiet as they were, resonated with an unsettling certainty. Liam looked around the small circle, seeing the fear etched on each face. He tried to project a calm he didn't feel. "Okay, we get some sleep, what little we can. No fires tonight. We'll break camp the second the sun touches the horizon. Everyone agree?" Again, the grim consensus. The thought of extinguishing the fire, their last bastion against the encroaching darkness, was terrifying. But the rising smoke, they all instinctively knew, was an invitation, a beacon. As Liam slowly doused the embers with water, a hiss of steam rose, quickly dissipating into the heavy air. The last flickering orange died, plunging them into near-absolute darkness, illuminated only by the faint, diffused moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. It wasn't just quiet, it was a hungry silence, a predatory hush that seemed to anticipate their departure. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, no longer sounded like the benign movements of the forest, but the measured steps of something approaching, something that had been waiting. They huddled together, four terrified souls in a world that had suddenly turned hostile, counting the minutes until the first sliver of dawn. The night stretched before them, an eternity of silent dread. The siege, night 2, brought no gentle slumber but a vibrating hum that seeped from the earth itself. Then the sounds began, a low, guttural growl that resonated through their sleeping bags, followed by a wet, rending noise that twisted Liam's stomach. Too large for a bear, too deliberate for a wolf. "Did you hear that?" Chloe whispered, her voice thin, a fragile counterpoint to her usual vibrancy. "Hear what?" Liam managed, feigning composure as his heart hammered. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam a meager defiance against the encroaching dark. A shriek, impossibly high-pitched yet raw, tore through the air, silencing Chloe. It was followed by a frenzy of impossible speed. Thud, 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 thud. Something colossal circled their tents, its footfalls a sickening crunch of undergrowth and snapping branches. The sheer velocity unnerved them most. Nothing so immense should move with such alacrity. Maya, ever practical, fumbled for her phone, its screen a dim glow in the gloom. "It's too large to be an animal, a moose maybe." Her usual certainty wavered. Noah, previously hunched, now sat rigid, eyes wide and fixed on the tent flap as if seeing through the canvas. "Not a moose," he breathed, a barely audible whisper. "It's hunting." Another shriek, closer now, pierced the night, a sound of pure agony, not animalistic but something far more dreadful. Then the tearing sound again, prolonged and grotesque, followed by a wet, chewing. The air grew heavy with a foul stench, decay mingled with fresh blood, so potent it made Liam gag. Chloe pulled her knees to her chest, trembling. She usually scoffed at scary noises, rationalizing them away. Now, her eyes darted between her friends, reflecting raw, unadulterated terror. The sounds outside escalated into a cacophony of snarls, frantic scrabbling, and deep, resonant thumps that shook the very ground. The creature no longer circled, it seemed to toy with its prey, or perhaps, with them. A sudden, violent jerk of the tent pole sent a shower of dirt raining down. They froze, a collective gasp. Something pressed against the thin fabric, a heavy, scraping sound against the nylon. Liam instinctively gripped his axe, knuckles white. A curious, desperate urge seized Chloe. She had to see. An irrational impulse, born of a need to comprehend the source of such profound dread. Her trembling hand reached for the tent zipper. Maya grabbed her arm. "Chloe, no! Are you insane?" Maya hissed, eyes wide with alarm. But Chloe's gaze was fixed on the barely perceptible bulge pressing against the tent wall. Her empathy, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a terrifying magnet, drawing her towards the unknown. She had to understand what caused such suffering. With a sudden, desperate pull, she yanked the zipper down a bare inch, creating a sliver of an opening. A blast of freezing, fetid air hit her, laced with that unbearable stench. For a fraction of a second, her eyes adjusted to the inky blackness beyond. What she saw was no campfire monster, but something far, far worse. It was impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally elongated and emaciated, like withered branches. Its skin, if it was skin, was stretched taut over prominent bones, a sickly grey against the deeper shadows. But it was the eyes that truly seared themselves into her mind, two malevolent incandescent coals that glowed with an ancient, predatory hunger. They weren't animalistic, they held a chilling intelligence, a primal awareness that sent a shockwave of terror through her. The glowing eyes seemed to lock onto hers, even through the tiny slit. A low, guttural rumble vibrated from its chest, a sound that promised unimaginable pain. Chloe's breath hitched. She slammed the zipper shut, her hands fumbling, her body convulsing with a silent scream. She scrambled backward, hitting Liam's chest, a choked sob escaping her lips. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the closed tent flap as if the monstrous image was still burned into them. What was it?" Liam whispered, his own voice hoarse with fear. Chloe could only shake her head, burying her face in her knees, her body racked with tremors. The silence that followed her glimpse was more terrifying than the sounds before, a suffocating blanket of dread that promised their ordeal was far from over. Noah's abduction. The scratching began as a tentative rustle, a whisper against the tent fabric near Liam's head, then escalated into a violent tearing drag. Claws, impossibly sharp, screeched down the synthetic material, a sound that vibrated through the ground beneath their sleeping bags. Liam jolted upright, fumbling for his multi-tool. "Everyone awake?" he hissed, his voice tight. "It's here." A predatory silence descended, thick and suffocating, far more terrifying than the scratching. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence. Then, a sudden, impossible rush of wind, not from any discernible direction, tore through the clearing. Leaves in the distant trees rustled violently for a split second, then fell silent. It was too fast, too unnatural to be mere wind. "Did you hear that?" Chloe whispered, her voice a thin thread of fear. Before anyone could answer, a new sound cut through the oppressive quiet. A voice, clear as a bell, yet subtly wrong, drifted from the tree line. "Help me! Liam! Maya!" It was Chloe's voice, unmistakable, but laced with a strange, distorted echo, like a record skipping just slightly. Chloe gasped, clutching her arms around herself. That's not me." Quote. Noah, who had been sitting stock still, eyes wide and unblinking, suddenly moved. He started to crawl towards the tent flap. "Chloe? Where are you?" he called out, his voice laced with concern. "Noah, no." Liam's command was sharp, desperate. "That's not her. Don't you dare go out there." "It sounds like she's hurt," Noah insisted, his hand already on the zipper. The mimicked cries from the woods intensified, now a more frantic pleading chorus of Chloe's voice, punctuated by choked sobs. "Noah, think!" Maya's voice was uncharacteristically high-pitched. "How could she be out there? She's right here." She pointed a trembling finger at the real Chloe, huddled in her sleeping bag. But Noah wasn't listening. His face was a mask of distress, his deep-seated empathy overriding all caution. "I have to check," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the tent. He unzipped the flap with a frantic jerk, revealing the impenetrable blackness of the forest. The distorted pleas for help seemed to beckon him, drawing him in. "Noah, for God's sake, stop!" Liam lunged forward, but it was too late. Noah scrambled out of the tent, a dark silhouette against the fainter gloom of the moonless night. He took 2 steps, his head tilted as if trying to pinpoint the source of the disembodied cries. Then, a blur of motion, too quick to fully register, erupted from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. A dark, impossibly gaunt shape lunged. There was a choked gasp, a sickening crunch that echoed in the stillness, and Noah's desperate, cut-short scream. It was a sound of pure terror, abruptly silenced, as if a hand had clamped over his mouth. A terrible guttural snarl ripped through the air, vibrating through the ground, then faded into the receding rustle of disturbed leaves. The eerie silence that followed was broken only by the frantic thumping of their own hearts. Inside the tent, Liam, Maya and Chloe were frozen, paralyzed by the horrifying speed and brutality of what they had just witnessed. The mimicked cries had vanished, replaced by an absolute void. Chloe began to sob, soft, broken sounds that tore at the silence. He's gone." Liam's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped his multi-tool. His carefully constructed facade of control had shattered. "It wasn't just watching us," he breathed, his voice raw. "It's hunting us." And it just took Noah. The chilling realization settled over them like a shroud. They were no longer campers encountering something strange, they were prey, trapped in the creature's hunting ground, and one of their own had just been claimed. Fire and flight. The snapping of branches grew frantic, closer, then a sickening crack as something heavy impacted the outermost barrier of their hastily erected perimeter. Liam's blood ran cold. He fumbled for the axe, his mind racing, a tangled knot of fear and frantic recall. Fire. It hates fire. But there was something else. A detail, a whispered warning from a forgotten story, something about an offering. His breath hitched, a desperate flicker in the back of his mind. A shadow, too tall, too thin, detached itself from the deeper darkness. It wasn't merely a creature, it was a famine-given form. Emaciated limbs, gaunt and stretched, ended in claws like obsidian shards. Its hide, a patchwork of starved fur and taut, pale skin, seemed to shimmer with an unholy cold, even as the air around it thrummed with raw, predatory heat. Empty sockets burned with an inner, malevolent glow fixated on them. A guttural snarl, more ripping fabric than animal sound, tore through the night as it coiled, then lunged. "The food, Maya! The food, all of it!" Liam roared, his voice raw, barely audible over the creature's horrifying shriek. He didn't wait for her to question, knew there was no time. He shoved a crumpled trail map and a lighter into her hand, pointing at the large pile of dry kindling and logs they'd gathered earlier, now an absurdly hopeful monument to survival. Maya, her face a mask of primal terror, moved with a sudden, jolting efficiency. She thrust the map under the driest bark, the tiny flame from the lighter sputtering, then catching. Liam meanwhile scrambled, tearing open their last 2 MREs, spilling out their contents, chili mac, beef stew, even the sugary dessert packs, and anything else edible from their backpack. He emptied a bag of trail mix, the nuts and dried fruit scattering, then hurled the lot onto the nascent flames. The dry wood caught with a hungry crackle fed by the sudden fuel. As the food hit the heart of the fire, it didn't just burn, it erupted. The fat sizzled and popped, the sugars caramelized and ignited, creating a blinding, almost concussive flash of light, and a sudden, overwhelming plume of acrid sweet smoke. The smell, A choking, sickly sweet aroma of scorched food exploded outwards. The Wendigo, mid-lunge, recoiled with a guttural shriek, its head whipping back. Its glowing eyes narrowed into furious slits, disoriented and enraged by the unexpected assault on its senses. The sudden light, the noxious smell, it was anathema, a temporary barrier. "Now!" Liam screamed, grabbing Maya's arm. Her eyes, wide and startled, snapped to his, then to the creature, still hissing and pawing at the air, as if trying to clear its vision. They didn't look back, didn't grab anything. Their tent, their supplies, their meticulously organized gear, all abandoned. Their heavy boots pounded the frozen earth, the roaring fire behind them casting their elongated shadows ahead, guiding them in a desperate, frantic dash towards the faint outline of their vehicle. Every second was a gift, every breath a desperate prayer, as the creature's enraged howls echoed, closing in behind them, the scarred silence. Their lungs burned, raw and aching, each gasp a painful protest against the exertion. Liam's side stitched with a cramp that threatened to buckle his knees, but the icy tendrils of terror coiling in his gut were a far more potent motivator. Behind them, the snapping of twigs and the guttural, hungry snarls had intensified, closer now than ever before. Maya, her usual measured strides abandoned for a desperate, scrambling run, stumbled, catching herself on a low-hanging branch. Her breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound of pure panic. "Almost there, Maya, just keep going." Liam wheezed, his voice ragged. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he saw it. A flicker of movement, impossibly swift. A gaunt shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness of the trees. Its eyes, he imagined, were twin points of malevolent light, burning with an ancient, insatiable hunger. He pushed harder, his legs pumping with a frantic, desperate energy. The air was growing lighter, a faint, almost perceptible shift from the inky blackness of night to a bruised purple. Dawn. It had to be dawn. Then, through the sparse skeletal trees that marked the forest's edge, he saw it. The dull gleam of polished metal, the familiar silhouette of his SUV, a lifeline, a beacon of impossible hope. With a final explosive burst of adrenaline, Liam burst free of the tree line, skidding on the loose gravel of the small, unpaved parking area. He fumbled for his keys, his fingers numb with cold and terror, their metallic jingle sounding impossibly loud in the deathly quiet. Maya scrambled behind him, her face pale and streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with a lingering primal fear. He jabbed the remote, the SUV's headlights flaring to life, cutting sharp golden swathes through the lingering darkness. The locks clicked. They practically fell inside, slamming the doors shut with a resounding thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Liam's hands shook as he shoved the key into the ignition. The engine turned over, a rough, comforting rumble. And then, nothing. No snarls. No snapping branches. No impossible speed. Liam twisted in his seat, peering through the rear window. The forest edge was still, silent, bathed in the nascent light of the rising sun. The purple bruised the eastern sky, bleeding into soft oranges and delicate pinks. Golden shafts of light began to pierce the upper canopy of the trees, banishing the last vestiges of true night. It was as if the very light itself had driven the horror back, forcing it to retreat into the deepest, darkest recesses of the woods. The Wendigo, or whatever it was gone. Banished by the sun. Maya was hunched in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling uncontrollably. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, punctuated by soft, almost inaudible sobs. Her analytical mind, so quick to dissect and explain, seemed utterly broken by what they had just endured. Her eyes, usually so sharp and observant, were wide and unfocused, staring out at the trees that now seemed so innocent and harmless in the growing light. Liam put the SUV in reverse, his foot trembling on the accelerator. He didn't care about anything but distance. He backed out of the parking spot, then spun the wheel, sending gravel spraying as he turned onto the narrow, winding dirt road. The tires bit, and the SUV surged forward, leaving whispering pines behind. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating. It was a silence filled with the echo of Noah's scream, the memory of impossible speed, the chilling sound of ancient hunger. Liam gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, His mind replayed the last few hours, an endless loop of terror and helplessness. He had always prided himself on his preparedness, his ability to handle any situation. But this had been beyond anything he could have ever imagined. He had brought them here. He had led them into this nightmare. The self-blame was a cold, bitter taste in his mouth. They drove for what felt like hours, the landscape gradually shifting from dense woodland to open fields, then to the first scattered houses of civilization. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? How did you put words to something that defied all logic, all reason? How did you explain an ancient, starving entity that hunted in the dark? Eventually, Liam pulled into a gas station, the first one they'd seen in miles. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store seemed impossibly bright, jarring after the oppressive darkness of the forest. He looked at Maya, truly looked at her. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes still haunted, but a spark of her usual resilience flickered there. "We need to get cleaned up," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Get some coffee." Maya nodded, a slow, jerky motion. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Liam, we can't tell anyone." His gaze met hers, and in her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own chilling certainty. Who would believe them? They would be dismissed, ridiculed, perhaps even locked away. It was a secret, a terrible, monstrous secret that would bind them forever. The Wendigo had marked them, not with physical scars, but with a deeper, more insidious wound. The memory of Noah, of the ancient hunger, would be a phantom limb always there, always aching. They were survivors, yes, but forever scarred, forever changed by the silence of the woods and the horrors it held.